Okay, hythloday. There's really two things here. It's the way the conversation goes between you and me and this Zenos Paradox thing, and then my original point in the video to Barklord, more of my view on science's fault in our mess. Obviously a philosophical video that referred to science, and science is a part of our culture and our life, right? Okay, now I get that you think I've given short shrift and that you really do think that Zenos Paradox isn't solved, and that you think that my saying it's solved must mean something I didn't say, that I believe space is continuous. No. I didn't say any of those things, and in a later segment I will go back to the 30-minute video to Barklord and I will play what I actually said about Zenos Paradox. This was an interesting video, and it refreshed a lot of memories because, like I said, it was 25 years ago when I was studying this, and I don't really think I need a more detailed version of it in a video that goes through a lot of things like how we learned the earth was round. I'm not saying anything other than here's things we learned from science that aren't our fault in a mess, right? Science's fault. They're not the fault of those things. But for right now, I see what you're getting at, and I appreciate that you want to look at it more technically. Some other people said that it's about enumerability and stuff. And yeah, I took it with a blurry thing. It's like in my video with all of these mathematical and scientific discoveries, you just got a 32 by 32 pixel version of we solved it. Now, I believe space is discrete. And the solution to Zenos Paradox is, hey, how do we cross the road? And by me saying that it's solved by geometric series and all of the mathematics around that, is I'm just saying there's a mathematical solution. There's also a material solution in that you can't, there's certain limit to how small you can break things down, so you always have something finite. But even with infinitesimals, you can solve the road. Both of those are solutions. In the other video, what's the title? Some rude title. I think I've been less rude to you, but we'll go into that. I'll go into our comments and where this started. You talk about the beginning being this comment you made in my video. Don't you think that since you were replying to me in the comments, I'm going to screen cap it so people can read as well. When you're replying to me in my comments, that maybe my video that you're replying in is the thing that's the context? So when you say I'm backing off and changing my definitions, oh, very philosophical general meaning of induction, it was a philosophical video to begin with. That is what induction generally meant. And the specific mathematical video you just made, very interesting. I will go with all of those details and where they illuminate me speaking loosely. I will agree I was speaking loosely. But it is true in that induction is a part of the limits. How would you get to that part where you're the capital N case without induction? Why do they teach you the inductive part, in first year and the other one in second? One relies on the other, the concepts from the other. Now, you're right, and I admitted this, I think, earlier on, that, the induction is to prove the N case. But yeah, you can't imagine how, that's why they put ... N is already starting to be this infinity kind of thing. But you have to treat it finite because there is no infinity. And so you do the inductive proofs to the N cases, and then you build limits on this. You don't see how that's an induction on induction, that you take the inductive proof you did there, and then you do another inductive thing with all of those that allows you to proceed. In other words, you don't see how that what was it, 1 minus r to the negative n or whatever, excuse me if I got it wrong, but the phrase that goes to 0 as capital N goes to infinity, you don't see how that's saying case n plus 1 is always less than case n, that value always goes closer to 0. You don't see how there's an inductive issue in that, in comparing that n and n plus 1 case. See, to me it's obvious from the mathematical thing that display you just gave is exactly what led me to believe that this stuff relies on induction, and the induction is the mathematical solution. You can also do a physical solution now that says, hey, you can only get a certain amount, smallest amount of energy and distance and everything, and you could talk about adding those up, how they'll always be finite and not take an infinite amount of time to traverse or anything else like that. But basically, I didn't know that you were a big fan of going into Zenos Paradox. I see how the more esoteric, the more philosophical and mathematical interpretations about enumerability and stuff of Zenos Paradox, yeah, they're deep, and maybe that hasn't been solved, simply mistaken. Fine. But on the other hand, the general understanding of it and the way it's used, and he was living thousands of years ago, was not so fine-tuned, and it did have to do with the idea that the road isn't crossable. Now, since you could cross roads, it's more of a condemnation of logic and math. But math eventually caught up and could handle it and say, Zeno, no, actually we can handle this. Even if space is continuous, we can handle it. Now, if space isn't continuous, we can also handle it. If it's made of discrete units, actually. I think it's made of discrete units, but that it's probably sensible to call it continuous in some new, more detailed version of what that means. Continuous as made of infinitesimals, or something that acts that way. And that's because the discrete units don't array themselves on a grid. There's something still infinite, you know, and a quanta of energy, you know, that looks like more energy relativistically to somebody traveling at a high velocity relative to you, so it's more than the Planck minimum in that frame of reference and less here, and all of that cross discreteness is rather interesting. I'm just waving a hand at that, hythloday, because my video was a philosophical video, right? And so I was using philosophical terms. And even though you're having this technical idea that Zenos Paradox isn't solved and it says these fundamental things, I'm not disagreeing. I was pointing people towards this paradox as a fundamentally interesting part of our history of knowledge. You agree with me on that? It's a big agreement, evidently. I mean, evidently you think it's an important way station. You just wouldn't characterize it as solved. You want people to think it still needs to be solved because there's ways of looking at it that have, you know, questions it raises that have not been solved. Okay, I look at it as, compared to the common sense effect of people being told Zenos Paradox, once you have a mathematical and understanding and also induction, you get a key of dealing with the confusing part of Zenos Paradox, which is its inclusion of infinity. And with induction, and granted with other tools and certain kinds of assumptions that you make and then justify in certain ways, you know, you get tools to understand that. It doesn't seem impossible, right? You can break down that in other infinities. And instead of thinking as infinity as this thing that's so infinite it would take infinite time and everything about it's infinite, you understand, well, an infinite this can lead to a finite that. You can have an infinite number of points on a line conceptually, or infinitesimal segments on a line, and it's still finite in length. You know, that these relationships are important. That's all I was doing in this video of telling people, like, think about when you learned that the world was round as a little kid, and think about when society learned that, and think about those kinds of transitions. And hey, there's a transition like that in these other areas, including Zenos Paradox. Now, I don't like to give you much benefit of the doubt because, frankly, I have a beef against you, and I've told you this, and I'm clear, and I'm honest, and this is the way that it is. You criticized my, you know, commissary idea that retired people should have access to basically U.S. like what would be military commissaries, that they should actually have these, and that we could have people on social services have access to these instead of cash money. They could have credit at a commissary where we could, well, you know, I'm not going to go into all the details of that, but you criticized that as you know, inherently socialist. And I'm like, oh, hey, okay, I understand why it would look that way. Let me make the distinctions. And then you're like, hey, these comments are hard to go back and forth. Let's have a debate. We got to the debate. It's like you were going to get to ask me some questions and expect direct answers, and I was going to get to ask you. You want to make it like there's some reason that, no, that doesn't make sense. It should just be one directional. Well, that's hypocrisy as far as I can see. We agreed at the head. Then you would get to go first and ask your questions, and then you're refusing to answer my questions. An agreement isn't something that you get to say, well, I always know the right thing, so if it's got to change, the agreement has to change, then that must be the right thing, and now we're doing it this new way. An agreement is you commit to what you judge at that time, and you agreed to do it. So I think that's intellectually bankrupt. I think that's totally, it makes me, I don't want to, I gave you just a couple of comments, right, of civil, hey, no, come on, you're misunderstanding, but, and then you're going to get more and more rude and all, you just trying to make yourself look smart. Bullshit. I don't want to give you any leeway because you have proved to be intellectually bankrupt. I invested, you don't understand. I make these kinds of videos whenever I want. It's like, hey, I'm bored, I make a video. I'm not bored, but you know, it's like, it's a spare time thing. So it takes a lot less time than saying, oh, I'm going to meet somebody at this time and stick them and we're going to have a discussion and I'm going to prepare some questions and I'm going to try to focus on letting him ask me these questions. That's a part of the rule. And I do all that preparation, and then you fucking intellectually bail and won't keep up your side of the argument. You know, and then I started drinking after that when everybody else shows up and there's an actual conversation started, and I'm like, I drank coffee for that, you know, first hour and a half or whatever, and we were supposed to have an hour-long conversation. You know, and then you join in with Mr. Biodegradable Man and something like, oh, he's a drunk. Well, yeah, I drink, and I have been drunk on camera, and I go out of my way to say, yeah, this is a part of my intellectualism. I think about this shit when I've had a drink as well. And it might be one of those spare moments, very likely, actually. You know? And so you're going to chime in on that stuff, and it's like you did not keep up your actual material side of a bargain that cost me time. More valuable than my regular video time. More valuable than a half an hour I sit down and I could sit down a half an hour and watch a video, a couple of videos. So I sit down for a half an hour and make a reply to you whenever it's convenient. To me, that's different than scheduling an hour out of my time. That if I schedule time, I usually only schedule time for like my daughters. YouTube doesn't get scheduled time. That's one of the issues that I have being in this community of people that seem to talk to each other more regularly. I'm not going to be particularly responsive or predictable because I'm fitting it in, but I do because I want to reply to people, engage, but they have to give me time. Or if they think I haven't replied to something I should, they just bring it to my attention. Maybe I missed it, maybe I forgot, maybe, you know, I'm trying to find time for it. And since it's spread out over time, we can do that, I think. And that's the process that's going on right here. Now, yeah, I was going to make a different video to go into those because I want to rewatch the Bar Calori video. But basically, what you call, you know, me waffling and stuff is like me saying, no, that was a video about all these different things. I wasn't going into the particular mathematics. Nothing you have said in your videos has contradicted what I said in the original video, which I haven't watched yet, but we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. But I think, you know, because me saying Zenos Paradox is solved is not necessarily, I understand though now why you would want to go, no, it's not solved. You should have said, hey, no, I don't consider it solved. Because consider it solved would make more sense to me. It would make more sense to me. It's not babying my ego. It's a matter of, in the context of the video I made, is like solved includes we got a handle on this. This isn't something we don't know how to address. You know, and you're saying, well, I think it should be addressed by admitting that we have an analytic argument that space must be discrete. Okay, that would also be a solution. So you think it's been solved too, but you just, what, have the solution that wasn't mentioned or something? Okay, mention your solution. In the context of science not being inherently a bad thing, I think our thoughts about Zenos Paradox do make a good example of science and mathematics and mathematical natural philosophy not being a bad thing, right? So, but I'm going to go through the exchange because that's another thing you misunderstood, is that my long video to you acted like it was on Zenos Paradox and you didn't even get to these things. No, you're the one making long, interesting, in-depth discussions of Zenos Paradox. I just mentioned it as a reference to something cool that should be understood and how our greater understanding of it. Oh, now I'm backing off the word solution. No, it's still a kind of solution. And when I was backing off in the first videos, it's because I was talking in that video about our miscommunication, and so I'm clarifying. I'm like, you know, don't get too technical on what I meant by induction is involved. It can be that, you know, you learn induction and then you learn about limits. I'm not saying that the actual thing that pumped something out, or, you know, I mean, I don't think anything I said in my original video should have implied that. And you could have been more specific in just saying he wasn't simply mistaken. Now, this is the final thing I'll say in this segment, which is some other people in Barklord, you appreciate Zeno. Fine, I love it. But, and Barklord has some good quotes, but these are ancient philosophers. There's not a huge body of exactly what they thought and how detailed. Okay, other philosophers talked about Zeno as being sort of cynically saying that reason wasn't sufficient to analyze nature. That's the most sophisticated it got. And plenty of other of them, like they do to skeptics and stuff, just sort of mischaracterized, like with some batty notion that he proved you couldn't get across a street. Like, this is a guy that doesn't even try to cross streets because he thinks it's impossible. Okay, that's unsophisticated, but also evidenced a lot in history of philosophy. And then the more sophisticated one is still about the brokenness of analytics instead of the brokenness of reality, and that's not true. There is a mathematical, analytical idea of this that I think addresses the problem. Now, you don't want to call it a solution. You're already starting to think of mathematical solution. I'm thinking like something that remember, I'm a skeptic. I don't think there's final answers to things. So when I say there's an answer to something, I mean it really increased the resolution, you know, down. It put more bounds and it got better understood. And I think we pretty much understand this stuff better than Zeno did. But, you know, maybe you took me as bad-mouthing him for simply mistaken, but please remember the context. I'm talking about what we have learned since then. I give him total credit for coming up with this paradox that still seems paradoxical to people at first blush, and by, you know, and even you still consider it paradoxical in some sense. But, so he's invented this thing, even though I think it was solved. It still has a weight, and solving it, I was saying, helps you learn about nature better. So I didn't really say anything bad for you to react to the way you did. So I'm going to watch the other video. I'll put in a clip of whatever I mentioned about Zeno in that half-hour video to Barklord, and I will also screen cap the comments, and we can go through that, and this will be a nice, you know, 2-hour video or something eventually in the next couple of days.